in though, Tessa, and explaining it for us. Let's move on, because a government consultation ends tomorrow on whether the law should be changed to the way gender is recognised in England and Wales. One option is to allow trans people to self-identify. Tomorrow we'll hear from trans people who want to see a change in the law. Today, Elizabeth Glinker has been talking to a group of feminists who are opposed to that change and has had access for the first time to their controversial Women's Place meetings.
What is a woman? This summer, the government launched a consultation on whether to make it easier for people to legally switch their gender, to self-identify. The Gender Recognition Act would be updated, ditching the medical procedures and assessments which are currently needed to get an official gender recognition certificate. Some feminists are opposed to this change.
I'm not hostile to trans, I'm definitely hostile to the politics of trans, which seeks to silence women's voices. They are not women.
That's led to conflict with sections of the trans community. This is well-known feminist Julie Bindle being blocked by trans activists as she tries to attend a meeting.
Well, are you blocking us? Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
The women against self-identification have been branded TERFs by their opponents, trans exclusionary radical feminists. They've been called bigots and accused of hate speech. One such group is A Woman's Place.
This group have never spoken to the media before. They've never let anyone attend any of their meetings. We've come up to Liverpool because they've said they're going to let us attend. We're just waiting for an email to come through telling us where the location is actually going to be. Oh, that's it. That's the message just come in.
Every day we hear politicians who bang on about Brexit and having a people's vote. Well, how about a women's vote? How about a women's vote on whether we want men in our female spaces?
You can see tonight's event is pretty well attended. There's well over 100 people in the room. We're filming the speakers, but we're not using our cameras on any of the audience, and that's because some of the women who are here say they fear repercussions.
Women have been assaulted going to our meetings, so this isn't, it's not just scaremongering.
About a year ago, we learnt about the attack on Maria McLaughlin at Hyde Park. Which came after a group of women were trying to organise a meeting to discuss concerns about the GRA, and we were horrified that women trying to meet to discuss that couldn't actually have a meeting, so we thought we would set up an organisation that made sure they could talk about it.
You will know that the trans community will say that actually what you're doing is peddling hate, and that this is about people being transphobic and being allowed to express those views.
Well, I think that's an irresponsible thing to say about women coming together about a law that affects them. It's not just the sort of big ticket items of males going into women's prisons, but I think there are things like, going into high street stores in the changing rooms, going to your sports centre in the changing rooms, how it's affecting children, and I think that those sorts of issues are frightening to women.
What do you say to people who say that you're transphobic and simply you're on the wrong side of history?
We're not transphobic. We're a group dedicated to making sure that women's rights are upheld. It really seems like common sense to us, and we don't know why we're coming under such attack.
Helen Watts was expelled from the Girl Guides 3 days before this meeting for breaching their social media policy.
People who take a contrary position to me often say I'm scaremongering, or I think that trans people are sort of predators. I don't think that at all. This is about the fact that we have male children sharing very sort of intimate spaces with female children. It's not the fact that I think those children are going to do anything. It's about respecting all the children's feelings.
Women's Place says they are not transphobic and that a number of transsexuals regularly attend their meetings. One of them is Debbie Hayton, who's opposed to self-identification. Her opinions have enraged some fellow transsexuals.
So the present law relies on a meaningful transition. Moving it to something just based upon an internal feeling of gender, well, it's impossible to measure that. So we're asking people to take us at our word. That's problematic for me as a transsexual person, because it just raises the question, if people don't believe me, then it puts me in a very, very vulnerable position.
We don't attack! We fight back!
There was no opposition on the night we attended, but across the country, wherever women's place have met, they've usually been picketed by trans activists.
2 days after the meeting in Liverpool, the women had an event in Leeds cancelled. They're actually having a meeting in the House of Lords today, so we've come along to find out what happened.
Well, we had booked a meeting in good faith. We'd been very open with the council, and then suddenly, when the venue was announced to the attendees, they just shut the meeting down.
I mean, there are probably members of the trans community who would say this was a victory because they stopped you having your meeting.
Well, they didn't.
They stopped you discussing
They
it.
stopped us having a meeting in the Civic Hall, but a local pub very generously agreed to host us, and so we had a brilliant meeting. We will not be silenced.
Regardless of what you think about the reform, it's actually about how we make sure that women's voices are heard and ensuring that happens. And politicians of all parties have really got to step up to the plate.
Benjamin, first of all, when we start this discussion, let's get a definition clear. What is gender and what is the difference between sex and gender?
Well, sex, maybe you're what would be considered the gender you were assigned at birth. Your gender is how you feel. And transgender people genuinely believe that their identity is different to that which they were assigned at birth.
But it is about a feeling.
Of course.
So
I'm gay, but it's not something that it wasn't written on my head.
Right,
I realise it over time.
Right, okay. I mean, on official documents, people are classed by sex.
Well,
male
not
or... Well, I'm just...
they're not, though.
Male
on your
or
driving
female,
licence,
not gender.
You're not. So I just went to the toilet at the BBC in the men's toilets. No one asked me to prove my gender. The only proof I would have of even who I am is my driving licence, and it doesn't say my gender on it.
So you would expect the state to recognise gender in all circumstances?
But it already does.
Does it in all circumstances?
The genuine nonsense about some of the people who are campaigning against the government's proposals is that since 2004, when the Gender Recognition Act came on board, people have been able to self-identify. In fact, it was a requirement. So as it said in that report, you had to live in your defined gender for 2 years. If you're living your defined gender and you were born a man and you defined as a woman, that means using women's facilities. It means dressing as a woman.
But you were living in your gender for 2 years.
You had to do that, but you had to self-identify to be at that stage.
Right, but being in the position to self-identify from day one, so you can say... Well, hang on, but you can say, I am a woman, I feel like a woman, and therefore I should have access to all of the same women-only places as a biological woman.
The law is quite clear on this. Since 2004, this has been the case with the Gender Recognition Act. It was then refined in the 2010 Equalities Act, passed right at the end of the Labour government with the support of the Conservatives, and that defined how you can self-identify.
So why does there need to be a change in the law?
Because this is about paperwork. So the current process requires a transgender person to go through the 2-year transition period and reflection period, and then to have a panel of doctors who they've never met decide whether they are the gender that they self-identify as.
But why shouldn't they do that? I mean, this is an arduous process, isn't it? This is a big change, whether it is a physical change and you have to go through some sort of operation, or whether it is a change mentally. But you're saying that is an intrusive and lengthy period of time, and there will be people who say, well, why not? Why shouldn't you go through an arduous process?
You don't have to in Ireland, and you don't have to in a lot of other countries.
The question is, why should the state get involved in someone's personal identity? I think that's the main thing.
Because the state's having to pay for operations.
That's nothing to do with it. That was already...
And equally, the state has a duty of care, not just to transgender people, but to women who might be affected if, for instance, a transgender, previously male rapist ends up in a woman's prison.
But the law already protects for that, and the government has said it's not going to change.
It didn't protect adequately in one particular prison where recently a female prisoner was attacked. It also hasn't recently protected in cases where men who have self-identified as women have gone into the sporting arena, and in a particular case, one female boxer was almost killed by somebody who self-identified as a woman. It's not a level playing field.
I don't want to say that these are not significant issues, but they are very small. Sure, but they're a very small number in comparison to the number of transgender people.
And herein lies the problem with this entire debate, if I may say, Benjamin. And, I feel it's really worrying because we see that footage of people being set upon. Surely saying even something on this will probably end up with me being trolled, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is a really
By the way, the trolling is from people who are anti-trans. You look through my Twitter feed and you look at the people who turned up.
There's trolling on all sides. There's lots of feminists who have argued that self-identification basically lessens the role of women in society, and that's an argument that should be listened to. We can't just have equality for some people and not everybody.
What about
here.
Trans men?
Hang on,
by the way. No one seems to care about them.
Trans men as well.
What about people
I'm
who
all for people having a debate. I'm not for debates being closed down, but equally, this is for most people such a niche issue, which is taking up an enormous amount of bandwidth.
If it's your entire life we're talking about and your ability to live your life in the way you want it, I think that the state shouldn't get involved in that.
Femi, do we have any statistics at all on what proportion of the population is affected directly by this issue? 1%. And yet, and it's demanding a massive dialogue.
Sorry, I want to just clarify. We've had a massive row in recent weeks about anti-Semitism. I'm Jewish, but there are far more transgender people than Jewish people, and yet we would fight against anti-Semitism.
An anti-Semitism argument can affect many different people of many different minorities because people can reflect on it. The transgender issue is hugely specific to a niche of the population.
And so that doesn't mean they should be protected.
Did I say that, Benjamin? No, I just said that people feel that the debate around it and the onus upon the rights of transgender people
minority issues are always going to be, by definition, minority issues.
Yes,
that's kind of the point.
But why is it such a bitter debate?
Oh, because we have we don't recognise the difference between the terms gender and sex. B, I mean, you mentioned the notion of a trans woman assaulting a woman. The issue of assault, and you talk about minority issues. If you take the issue of assault, how much of that problem is what you just described of a trans woman assaulting a naturally born woman? That you're blowing it out of proportion when the main issue is just fix the issue where it occurs. If you see a problem, address the problem.
Hang on a second, Teresa, you may have to vote on this shortly, but you know, it may come to the Commons first in terms of the Gender Recognition Act. What do you think, and what will you do?
The most important thing is that we have this debate in an atmosphere of mutual respect and understanding. I mean, clearly, people feel very strongly on both sides of this debate. We need to look objectively at what the government may or may not bring forward. Largely, as Benjamin says, this is about process of gender recognition. There's a great deal of anxiety out there about things that are not actually likely to end up in legislation or coming before Parliament. So I think it's very difficult, but trying to take some of the heat out of this debate and look at it in a down-to-earth way at the points of view on both sides.
And it's a very personal debate, isn't it? I mean, we've just heard that being expressed here in the studio. I mean, in terms of self-identification as a principle for you, do you think trans people should be able to self-identify? They think they're a woman or a man, and then that should be believed?
Or they know they're a woman rather than...
Although they know that they're a woman or a man.
Of course, self-identification has to be part of this. I think the focus of the government's consultation is that the current process for recognising and responding to people's feelings about their gender is not working as it should do and could be made to work better.
I think the big problem was the Prime Minister came to the Pink News Awards last year, made her pledge, and there has actually been quite a vacuum. And during that time, there's been a campaign of misinformation by those opposed to transgender rights. I think it would have been preferable if the government, having announced the policy, had actually got on and opened the consultation back then. And obviously, you know, Brexit and everything else has got in the way.
All right, very quickly, the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, has pulled out of a conference in Saudi Arabia. That'll be about the journalist Khashoggi. But from all of us here, goodbye.